I was living in a car, and I didn't know how long it would take to get home again. I didn't belong living in a car. I had a power bank in the trunk. It had two electrical outlets on it so that you could operate a lamp and an electric cigarette rolling machine. And it also had a sleeping bag in the trunk, and a couple of camping items like spray-on mosquito spray and sunscreen, this kind of stuff. I had gone camping on Monday, and I noticed on Tuesday when you looked down the hill from the campsite, you could see the city. On Monday, all the lights of the city were still on, but Tuesday, there were no lights in the city. So I used my car radio to check the news. And according to the news, a computer hacker had hacked the power plant not only in my city, but also across the entire continental United States. So there it was, Tuesday at 6 o'clock in the evening. I packed up my stuff in the trunk, and I started driving. When I got about halfway home, I realized my cellular phone was out of battery. I could charge it if I plugged it into that power bank, but the power bank was also out of electricity. I would have to recharge the power bank in order to plug in my cell phone. So it got to be about midnight, and I found a house. The house had lights on. It looked like they had a gas-powered generator operating their entire house. But it was about midnight, and they were all sleeping. So I went around the back to see if they had an outlet by the porch, and they did. So I plugged in my cell phone in one of their outlets and my power bank in the other. I was going to have to charge both of these items before I hit the road and hope I didn't run out of gas before I got home. At daybreak, I left that yard, and I took my car a little way down the road. My phone was charged, and my power bank was also charged, but the gas in the car ran out. I was at least a 2-hour drive from home, at that point in time. By then, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't sure where I was going to get gas. All of the gas stations were closed. Now, gasoline isn't electricity, obviously, but it requires an electric switch. When you put $40 on pump number 7, the man inside the station needs to flip a switch to turn on pump number 7. Well, none of those switches were going to be working. None of the stores were open, none of the gas stations were open. I was going to have to walk probably about 120 miles unless I could find another ride. My car was parked in a gas station parking lot, but it looked like a ghost town. There were no people outside, no other cars driving anywhere. Nobody was at the gas station. It was closed. I tried my cell phone, and I got this sort of bell ringing. It was almost like a whistle. Not a bell exactly, but like a whistle. And then it said in a robotic voice, "Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please try again later." And it hung up on me. I tried repeatedly, and I got the same result. I couldn't call my brother. I couldn't call my mom. It didn't matter who I called, it was the same result. So I tried to call the emergency operator to see what they would say, and again, I got the same recording. So I called the direct number of the police station in my neighborhood. I was still 2 hours from home, but maybe somebody would answer. This was a different message. It didn't say my call couldn't be completed. It had a different message, but you could tell that AI had read it out loud. It pretty much said that a computer hacker had shut off all of the power plants in the whole country, and that we could expect that none of the stores were able to open or operate. None of the banks would be able to open or operate. It was pointless to evacuate because the entire continental United States was affected. It literally said the same thing I already heard on the news at 11 o'clock the night before on the car radio. I needed to figure out a way to get home. I didn't have a generator at home. I didn't own my own house. I had an apartment, but there were 4 more power banks at home, where they at least all had 2 outlets on them. I could have lasted about a month. Just, boiling water with my hot plate and, having some semblance of reality, normal life. You can't do that in a car. There would have been other apartment buildings that might have an outlet on the outside to recharge these, but I would have to do it late at night when nobody could see me. You wouldn't want everybody to know that you had a product like that, or you might get robbed. Most of the day on Tuesday, I had been camping, and I had been kind of hanging out with whoever was at the campground. When I left on Tuesday night at 11 after hearing the news, there was nobody left at the campground. I had told everybody what I heard on the radio, and they had all tried to go home as well. I didn't know if there was a chance I would run into one of the campers at that gas station. It depended on which direction they traveled in. But at the time, I didn't see anyone. I looked at my cell phone. Even though I couldn't call anybody, it still functioned as a clock and a calendar. It was now Wednesday at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was the end of August. I knew I would have to get home. There's a rainy season in Massachusetts in September and October. I didn't want to live in my car. At least at home you have a shower and a bed, and a toilet for that matter. I looked around the gas station on the outside of the building, hoping one of the doors would be unlocked. None of the doors were unlocked. None of the windows would open. But there were 2 cars parked behind the gas station that looked like someone had started to do work on them, like engine repair or something. I got the idea of stealing gasoline from those cars. I wasn't sure how to do it, but I had seen it done in a movie before, so I looked for a plastic gas can outside. I didn't find one, but I did find a bucket you would plant a regular potted plant in, and it was just sitting there with a little bit of rainwater in it. So I emptied the rainwater, and I wiped the inside of the bucket with my t-shirt, trying to make it as clean as possible. Then I would need a long hose to siphon the gas, but I didn't know where I would get a hose from. There was an ordinary garden hose attached to a house nearby, but they didn't have any pieces on the ground. I was going to have to cut somebody's garden hose to get a piece of hose, and I didn't have a knife. At first, I was a little confused about what to do. I knew it was an emergency, but I still didn't feel good about stealing. Then, a young man appeared before me. I didn't even see him approach the area. He asked me if I was trying to steal gas out of those cars. I said I was thinking about it, but I wasn't sure if I should, and I wasn't sure how. He told me he could get me a can of gas, not the bucket I was carrying, but a regular gas can. He asked what I had to trade. I told him I had a sleeping bag that was almost brand new. He said he would be back in about a half an hour, that I should stand next to the gas station where my car was parked. It would take him a half an hour to bring the 5-gallon gas can for me. I had a half an hour. After he was out of my sight, I went to my trunk. I took the sleeping bag out of the trunk, and I locked the trunk. I was happy that he didn't make me open the trunk in front of him. He would have seen the power bank. I didn't want to part with that item. I didn't know if this man was just a neighbor or a criminal, or who he was. If he knew how to steal gasoline, he was probably a criminal before the emergency, but he might not have been a criminal. He might have just happened to own a gas station. I didn't really know. Either way, he came back in a half an hour and he traded the sleeping bag for the gas can. I asked him his name. He said his name was Roger. He said he lived in a house nearby, and he happened to have gas at his house because he had a gas-powered generator. And I asked why he was willing to part with a can of gas, and he said because he could see that I was stuck and that I couldn't leave the area without it. He said, "You must be going somewhere important." And I said, "Yes, I'm just going home. I don't normally live in my car." I drove the rest of the way home, but I noticed Roger following me. I recognized him in my rearview mirror. He must have lived awful close to that gas station. He was behind me the whole way home. When I parked my car, he got out of his red pickup truck, and he asked if I was all right, and I said, "I think I'll be okay. I'm just not sure what to do first." He said, "Do you have an apartment in this building?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Most of the people have evacuated, even though they were told not to. Because he has a generator, he can watch television news. One of the TV stations has a generator, and they're still putting on the news. There's been massive evacuations, but the people who left town ended up stuck on the highway because they couldn't get gas. The same reason I couldn't get gas. The switches can't turn on. There were hundreds and thousands of people stranded along the highway where their cars wouldn't move. They should have stayed home. Roger handed me my sleeping bag in the driveway. He told me he didn't want the sleeping bag, but he was happy that I had been willing to trade instead of steal. He said I was a good person, and he wished me good luck. He also said if the power doesn't turn back on in a couple of weeks, he would stop by and check on me because he had a garden at his home, and he might be able to get me some vegetables. I thanked him, and I went home. I could see him driving out of the driveway and heading down the road as I stepped inside my apartment building. The first thing I noticed is he was right. There was nobody in the building. They had all evacuated. The doorman wasn't there. None of the apartments had televisions running, even though some of the tenants had power banks. You could hear the silence in the hallway. Even the family with children had no noise coming out of their door. You could definitely tell I was the only one there. I went to my apartment. I had to take the stairs because without electricity, there isn't any elevator. I got to my door, I let myself in, and I checked all of my power banks at the same time. There were 4 at home that I had not taken camping, and 1 from camping. They were all pretty charged up. The 1 from camping was still charged from the house I had gone to. The other 4 were about 80% charged from whenever was the last time I used them. So I checked the water. It looked clean enough even though I didn't have a way to test it, but the faucets were working. So I plugged in the television to a power bank and a lamp, and I went ahead and watched the local broadcast. He was right. That particular station was still putting news on. So I went ahead and I watched the broadcast. They were running news 24/7. There were many images from the highway of people stuck out there. There were a lot of people. Then there were interviews with people who stayed home. Many of them didn't have a generator or a power bank. They didn't know what they were going to do. In the first couple of days, I used anything that would have went bad fast, like fruit or bread. Anything that typically would go bad first. It was pretty hot out, but I had a regular fan that I could plug into one of the power banks. At night, I would go out around midnight and plug in the power banks to houses that had generators if they had an outlet near their porch. You had to be careful doing that because some people have a dog. If their dog was outside, you wouldn't get away with it. Even if it was a friendly dog, it would have barked in a friendly way, and people would have known someone was out there. I had to be very careful, but I would do that between 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Then, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd go home and sleep for 8 hours, and then around noontime, I could put the news on and eat whatever I had at the house, or, as people say, an apartment. But generally, I was able to get into some of the neighbors' apartments too, in my own building. Some of the neighbors had trusted me with their spare key. I was able to get some cereal and some pasta and some other stuff. And thankfully, I really had a hot plate, so I could boil water and make the pasta, or I could eat cereal out of the box. There was no way to get milk or keep milk cold, but you could just eat cornflakes like they were potato chips right out of the box. It was better than nothing. One morning, it was about the 10th or 11th day, I was asleep, and I heard knocking on the door. And the first thought I had in my head was that it must be Roger with his vegetables. He was early. It had only been 10 or 11 days, and he said it would take a couple of weeks. But I wanted to stay asleep. As much as I needed the vegetables, I just really wanted to stay asleep so much. So I kept my eyes shut a little longer, but he kept knocking, and there was more knocking. So I opened my eyes and the lights were on, which I was surprised by. So I got out of bed and I put my bathrobe on. And when I got to the kitchen, I noticed the hot plate was not on the kitchen table where I had left it, and all of the power banks were put away where I keep them when I'm not using them, all 5 of them. So I was very confused. I looked at my cell phone, and it wasn't the date that I thought it was. It was the day before I went camping, and someone was knocking. So I answered the door. It was my friend Michelle. Michelle was asking if I felt like going camping. She had bought a spot at a campground that night, and she wasn't planning on using it because she had an errand to do. It was déjà vu. I had had this memory already. By any chance, are you going to meet that old boyfriend, the one that you broke up with 7 years ago? Did he call you? I asked her. Are you going to see him? The one that was hacking computers 7 years ago that you left him because he was hacking other people's computers? Everything clicked in my brain. She nodded. She looked like she was going to cry. I remembered when they broke up. She had caught him hacking into banking institutions. He would siphon $3 or $4 out of each person's account, and he would mask it so it looked like a bank fee. People wouldn't question $3 or $4, but because there were millions of accounts, he made several $1,000,000 doing that. And he never got caught, except Michelle found out about it and left him. I said, "Did he call you?" She said, "Yes. He wants me to help him with a project tonight." I said, "You need not to go." I said, "It's very important that you don't go." And she asked why, and I said, "He's back to hacking computers." I said, "I can't tell you how I know this, but if you go there tonight, it's going to be really bad." Michelle wrote down the address that he told her to go to. He had agreed to meet her at a certain address, but he hadn't told her what the errand was they were going to be doing together. And I had no idea why she would agree to that from someone she hadn't seen in 7 years. It made me wonder if she was secretly talking to him and just didn't tell me. Because why would she agree to meet with someone after that long, unless he had been texting her, here and there since then? But she wrote down the address that the errand was at, and she gave it to me. I told her to go camping, and that I'm not going to go camping, and she nodded, and she cried a little bit. When she left, I looked at my phone again. I looked at the date, I looked at the time. It felt so unusual to have this kind of déjà vu. I didn't know if there was a glitch in the matrix, but I folded the piece of paper and I went down in my car to the police station, where my brother was employed. He wasn't a police officer at all. He was a psychologist helping the homeless people. Anybody who got picked up for vagrancy, it was my brother's job to determine what kind of shelter or group home to put them in. I handed the paper to my brother, and I told him what happened. I told him about the dream I had and how real it had felt. He said he would have somebody look into it. For the rest of the day, I did my laundry and cleaned my apartment. Thankfully, I had the day off from work, so I had plenty of hours to recover from the strange dream situation. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the regular news came on. Michelle's ex-boyfriend had been arrested. It was all over the news. He had some computer program. It was supposed to shut off all of the power plants. He was supposed to have executed his plan that night, but it needed 2 computers to operate. He would have needed to flip a switch on one computer while someone else flipped a switch on a totally different computer in a different part of his house. These were supercomputers. They were big. You couldn't just unplug it and move it like a laptop. His original plan was that his roommate would flip the other computer, but his roommate wasn't doing it. His roommate had refused. That's why they decided to get Michelle involved. They interviewed Michelle on the news, but they also interviewed the roommate, and I watched as the man was taken away in handcuffs. His plan was to shut off electricity in the whole United States. Michelle turned state's evidence for the stealing from the banks. This was a case that the FBI didn't even know existed, but Michelle had proof of it in her apartment. As I watched the news, I happened to notice that the FBI agent involved in the arrest was no other than Roger, the man with the red truck. My heart skipped a beat for a second. I never knew if I was clairvoyant or I just had a very coincidental, accurate dream. It all seemed so strange. I decided to never tell my brother or Michelle about Roger. It was just too much for me. I took a couple of days off of work. I ate ice cream and I watched reruns of Buffy the Vampire Slayer on DVD. I knew if I convinced myself it was all a coincidence, I would stop trying to think about it.